Navigating the fantasy football landscape in Week 9 is crucial as playoff preparations ramp up. With the San Francisco 49ers and Pittsburgh Steelers on bye, top players like Brock Purdy, Najee Harris, and George Kittle will be missed. Here's a look at key players to start or sit with this week. Week 9, Fantasy Football. Start 'em and sit 'em. QB start, Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are giving up the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks, allowing at least 4 passing touchdowns in 3 of their last 4 games. Expect Mahomes to shine, mainly as he builds chemistry with DeAndre Hopkins. Start. Matthew Stafford, Los Angeles Rams at Seattle Seahawks. Stafford played 2 games this season with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, averaging 298 passing yards and 2.5 touchdowns in those outings. The Seahawks defense is vulnerable, making Stafford a solid streaming option for those missing Purdy. Start. Bo Nix, Denver Broncos at Baltimore Ravens. Fresh off a 4-touchdown game against the Panthers, Nix can be trusted against a Ravens team that has allowed the most passing touchdowns in the league. Sit. Kyler Murray, Arizona Cardinals versus Chicago Bears. The Bears are tough on quarterbacks, allowing just 11 fantasy points per game. Murray's ceiling is limited against a solid defense, making him a risky start this week. Tua Tagovailoa, Miami Dolphins at Buffalo Bills. Tagovailoa has struggled historically against the Bills, and he performed poorly in their last matchup. With his record of 1-7 against Buffalo, it's best to sit him this week. Week 9, Fantasy Football. Start 'em and sit 'em. RBs. Start Aaron Jones, Minnesota Vikings versus Indianapolis Colts. Jones had an off week in Week 8, but faces a Colts defense that has allowed 162.5 rushing yards per game over the last month. Look for him to bounce back. Start Kyren Williams, Los Angeles Rams at Seattle Seahawks. Williams has scored in 10 straight games and is up against a Seahawks run defense that has allowed nearly 200 yards per game to running backs. Rashad White or Bucky Irving, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs have been formidable against running backs, not allowing a touchdown since Week 3. Avoid starting either Buccaneers back this week. C. Javonte Williams, Denver Broncos at Baltimore Ravens. Williams was disappointed last week and now faces one of the best run defenses in the league. Unless he has a solid receiving day, keeping him on the bench is best. Week 9, Fantasy Football. Start 'em and sit 'em. WR start. Michael Pittman Jr., Indianapolis Colts at Minnesota Vikings. With Joe Flacco under center, Pittman's production has improved significantly. He's a solid low-end WR2 this week. Start Cedric Tillman, Cleveland Browns versus Los Angeles Chargers. Tillman has emerged as Jameis Winston's top target, making him a viable option against the Chargers' lineups for Week 9. Remember to monitor injury reports and make adjustments to optimize your roster for a successful week. The Browns just allowed Zay Flowers to rack up 7 catches for 115 yards against them. McConkey could have similar success after catching 6 passes for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns in Week 9 against the Saints. Start Xavier Worthy and DeAndre Hopkins, Kansas City Chiefs versus Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season, so this is a fantastic matchup for Worthy and Hopkins. Feel free to wire up Worthy as a high-upside WR2, while Hopkins could be a higher-volume WR3 as he develops chemistry with Mahomes. Sit Keenan Allen, Chicago Bears at Arizona Cardinals. Allen still needs to click with rookie quarterback Caleb Williams, who is averaging under 10 points per game in full PPR leagues. The Cardinals may not be a powerful passing defense, but it's still challenging to trust Allen as Chicago figures things out on offense. Sit Tyler Lockett, Seattle Seahawks versus Los Angeles Rams. Lockett looked primed for a big outing in Week 8 when DK Metcalf was out with a knee injury. Instead, he caught just 1 pass on 3 targets for 9 yards. His average depth of target is the lowest it has been since 2020. making Lockett a middling flex play against a divisional opponent in Week 9. Sit. Rashad Bateman, Baltimore Ravens versus Denver Broncos. With Baltimore's acquisition of receiver Deontay Johnson, Bateman's target share in the Ravens' passing offense is on the horizon. Bateman followed up his 4-catch, 121-yard day in Week 7 with a 1-catch dud against the Browns, which included dropping a 50-yard pass that hit him in the chest. Sit. Jalen McMillan and Sterling Shepard, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at Kansas City Chiefs. McMillan and Shepard may be primary beneficiaries of the absences of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but this matchup could be more favorable. The Chiefs allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers so that Baker Mayfield may focus on his backs and tight ends. Week 9. Fantasy football stardom and situm. TE's start. TJ Hawkinson, Minnesota Vikings versus Indianapolis Colts. Hawkinson is back in the lineup for the first time since suffering a torn ACL and MCL last December. The Colts have allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, making this a favorable spot for him. Start Mike Gesicki, Cincinnati Bengals versus Las Vegas Raiders. With T. Higgins doubtful for Week 9, Gesicki should see plenty of targets after a 9-target performance in Week 8. The Raiders' defense has been close to league average against tight ends, making this a favorable matchup. Start A.J. Barner, Seattle Seahawks versus Los Angeles Rams. With Noah Fant and DK Metcalf out, Barner has a chance to significant targets against a Rams defense that ranks 32nd in DVOA against tight ends, allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game. Start Cade Otton, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at Kansas City Chiefs. Otton has been productive lately, averaging 8.5 catches for 94.5 yards and a touchdown per game over his last 2 outings. With Tampa Bay short-handed at receiver, expect him to be a solid start against a Chiefs team that has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends. C. Tucker Kraft, Green Bay Packers versus Detroit Lions. Kraft has stayed within 3 receptions since Week 5 and faces a Lions defense that allows the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends. If Jordan Love is sidelined, Kraft may struggle to produce. Sit. Dalton Kincaid, Buffalo Bills versus Miami Dolphins. Kincaid must be consistent, finishing as a top 10 tight end only twice this season. The Dolphins have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to tight ends, making this a low upside matchup for him. Sit. Zach Ertz, Washington Commanders, at New York Giants. Despite a solid outing against the Giants in Week 2, Ertz faces a tough matchup this week. The Giants have allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to tight ends and have not allowed a touchdown to the position yet this season.